Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Katherine M. Porter channel. I'm Alan Ireland, and I don't know how I keep corralling people to spend time on my channel, but we have another great guest today that's going to educate us about Katherine M. Porter. She received a BA from Northwestern University, a master's degree from Middlebury College, and a doctorate with high honors in modern French literature from the Université de Provence, and she retired from teaching in the English and Applied Foreign Languages departments at the Université de Toulon.
Mhm.
She did a study of Porter's time in Mexico and in Paris, and she's currently the president of the Katherine M. Porter Society. So, welcome, Dr. Alice Cheylan. How are you?
Thank you. I'm fine. I'm very well. Thank you
Wonderful,
very much.
wonderful. Well, I'm
It's
delighted
nice to
that,
be here.
yes, and I'm delighted to have you with us. You're going to educate me and my audience about Katherine M. Porter's time in Paris. And I hope to kind of interweave that with a discussion of the vignette and Ship of Fools from pages 205 to 215, in
Mhm.
which Mary Treadwell recollects her time in Paris and how much she's looking forward to living there again. So we'll try
Mhm.
to. I'll see if I can. I'll see if I can interweave that in our discussion somewhere.
Be great.
So I
Mhm.
want to start out, I guess, with the obvious question. When did Porter go to Paris? How long did she stay there? How many times did she visit? And what brought her to Paris in the first place?
Okay. Well, to begin with, it's difficult to say exactly how long Porter lived there and how many times she visited. Basically, she was there from 1931 to 1936, which included several trips back to the States. She originally set sail from Veracruz, Mexico in late August 1931. And this was, of course, the boat trip that inspired Ship of Fools. Which was based on her experiences on the boat, as well as other experiences she had in Europe. Uh, and it gives the story a bit of the pre-World War II and the rise of Nazism in Europe. Her original plans were to stop in Havana, Tenerife, Southampton, Brennan, Berlin, and then to go to Paris before going down to Nice and finally settling down in Villefranche, which is near Nice. But she only got as far as Paris. At the end of November 1931, she left Bâle, Switzerland for Paris, where she married Eugene Presley, her third husband, and happily settled down to domestic life as the wife of a U.S. consular worker. Her time in Paris corresponds to the time she was married to Presley. They went back to the States together in October 1936, and Porter remained there when Presley left in April 1937, which also marked the end of their marriage.
I see. Okay, so it made me think of David and Jenny in Ship of Fools. David wants to go to Spain, and Jenny wants to go to France. So
Mhm.
was there that, do you know if there was that conflict between her and her husband at that time?
Yes, yes, I think there was. Presley wanted to go to Spain. He had the possibility of working in Spain, but she did not want to go to Spain. So he's the one who made the concession and came back to meet her in Paris.
Okay. And I guess it was a kind of a fad for writers at that time to go to Paris. Remember the so-called Lost Generation and
Yes,
that crowd. So I guess it was inevitable that Porter would end up there being a writer at that time. I
right.
assume. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
It was at the turn of the 20th century,
Mhm.
really, that American writers began to come to Paris and come to Europe. And it was because there was so much going on there. There was a real artistic
Sure.
upheaval. And there were many Americans who came. One of the first ones was Henry James, who was born in New York in 1905, I guess. No, um, no. He spent much of his adult life going back and forth between the States and England.
Hmm.
And it was in 1905 that he took on British citizenship finally. There was also Edith Wharton, who
Hmm.
followed in James's footsteps, and she moved to Paris in 1907 and remained there until her death in Saint-Brice in 1937.
Hmm.
Ezra Pound left his native Idaho for London and then lived in Paris in the early 1920s. Amy Lowell traveled frequently between Boston, London, and Paris before World War I. And Gertrude Stein arrived in 1903 and stayed until her death in 1946. These artists were among the first expatriates to come before World War I. And there were, of course, many others that came during World War I. For example, Hemingway, Wyndham Lewis, Rupert Brooke, and Richard Aldington enlisted in the British and American armies and served in Europe. And they were the ones who became known as Stein's lost generation after
Yes,
the war.
yes. And all
Yeah.
the people that you mentioned, I know Porter met Gertrude Stein. She met Ezra Pound.
Mhm.
Did she meet any of the other literary figures you mentioned when she was in
Uh,
Paris or any place else?
she met Ford Madox Ford.
Yes.
But Porter was actually at the end of this wave
Hmm.
because Porter arrived in 1931 and the lost generation is mainly in the 20s. So he was at the end of the wave. And you can read about this in Hemingway's A Movable Feast,
Hmm. Hmm.
artists that were in Paris during the 20s, and also in Stein's the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas,
Hmm.
which gives you an idea of who was there. And but Porter was at the end of this, and she met those that had stayed over, really. She did meet Hemingway.
Yes.
There's a famous anecdote about when she went to Sylvia Beach's bookstore, Shakespeare and Company in Paris, and Hemingway was there. And Hemingway just looked at her, and Sylvia Beach wanted to introduce the two of them as the two most important American writers of the time. And Hemingway just looked at her for about 10 seconds and turned around and left.
Yes.
She was, of course, very insulted, but said she didn't know if he was insulted to be mentioned on the mentioned compared to a woman writer was what
Hmm.
upset him, she thought.
I read Hemingway's letters a while back, some of his letters, and he mentions Porter once, at least in the collection that I read. He called her dull, not as a person, but as a writer. And
Mhm,
Porter also had some unflattering things to say about Hemingway, except later she kind of, her opinion of Hemingway changed. She realized later, she said how very good he was. So it sounds
mhm,
like her opinion of Hemingway evolved, but Hemingway's opinion of Porter did not, if
mhm.
I have that right.
Right. Well, Hemingway was not very flattering about women writers in general, I
Oh,
think.
okay. Okay.
And Porter was also Porter had her ups and downs. She would admire some people, and then afterwards, she would not admire them as much.
Like
When she
Gertrude
was,
Stein. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
When she started off, I think she thought she reviewed a couple of Gertrude Stein's books in the 1920s. But then when she met Gertrude Stein in Paris, she said Gertrude, she'd never been so bored, and that it was a stifling atmosphere, I think were her words.
And she felt she was in the wrong place with the wrong people. She said that
Yeah.
in a letter. Okay. Porter, I know, as we all know, who are student supporters, she was always looking for a home
Mhm,
for herself, and so I was thinking of Paris. You know, for Mary Treadwell, Paris is kind of a utopia, you know, and
mhm,
Ship of Fools. So I was wondering what similarities there were between Treadwell and Porter as far as their views of Paris. It almost sounds like Mary Treadwell is Catherine Ann Porter when she's talking about Paris. So I was
mhm,
wondering, was Paris kind of a utopia for Porter? What did she like about Paris, and what didn't she
mhm.
like?
Right. Well, Porter, I don't think Paris was really home. Porter at one time said that home was wherever she had her typewriter,
Hmm.
wherever she could write. So Paris was home for a certain time, I think. Um, and she said that home was really Indian Creek, Texas.
Hmm.
And it was her memories that brought her back home always. Uh, And she said that she explained in a letter to her Aunt Ione in 1933 that the place was unimportant because you could write anywhere. What was important was the family cord, the family ties, and that it was the memories that were attached to these.
Hmm.
So Paris was not really home, but she liked it while she was there, I think, for a certain time.
So she wasn't as crazy about it as Mary Treadwell was.
Well, Mary Treadwell, it's interesting. Mary Treadwell's Paris is the Paris of her memories.
Hmm.
She wants to go back there, but she remembers the bright side of it, and it's the bright side when she was young.
Hmm.
Is it, is she really talking about Paris, or is she talking about being young and having the world at her feet?
Hmm.
That's the question. But they did have it was Porter's Paris in the sense that Mary Treadwell missed the tourist sites,
Hmm. Hmm.
the Musée de Cluny, the whole area in Montparnasse,
Hmm.
which was Porter's neighborhood actually. And Mary Treadwell, that was what she remembered. The guinguette and a certain at the Place d'Enfer Rochefort, something like that. Um, they had the same memories, but Porter's were a little more realistic, I think.
Yes.
Porter Porter remembered where she lived and the problems she had had with plumbing in her apartment and with electricity and all. Whereas Mary Treadwell, it was all glorified.
All idealized. Definitely.
Um,
Definitely.
but they were definitely the same neighborhoods that they liked.
Hmm. Now, I have to kind of a little going off on a little sidetrack here. I talked to two people years ago who visited France and Paris and came back and told me about it. And they both said what I've heard other people say too, that the people in the rest of France are fine, very nice, but the Parisians are so rude. Is that still a reputation or a stereotype that Parisians have to this day? Is that fair?
I think I I think it is still a stereotype that still exists. It
Okay.
still exists. Um, what can I say? Um, I think they are maybe rude by American standards,
Yes.
but not by their own standards.
Well, it's the same way as I grew up in the South, and Southerners think Northerners are so rude, but
Right,
Northerners don't think they're rude. It depends on where you've been brought up and where you've gone. You're comparing it to what your upbringing was. So it's not always fair. And
right, exactly.
I guess if Southerners had grown up in the North, they would think that their manners were normal, and they would think Southerners were strange. I'm sure they do. So,
I'm sure they do. I'm sure they
so-
do.
okay.
Well,
So aside, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Paris does still have that reputation, but it's not always fair. It depends on your experiences.
Sure.
I've known people who have been very upset because they've had their car broken into in Paris or
Hmm.
they've had some sort of problem, but your car can be broken into in New York also.
Oh, and I'm sure, yeah,
So,
well, any city, any urban area, you can have more crime, I suppose. So, and
right.
I just thought I'd throw that in because I've always heard that my whole life that Parisians are so. I was just wondering if it was fair, and I've always wanted to visit Paris myself. It's on my bucket list. So
Yeah.
I don't care if they're rude or not. I want to visit. So
Well, you should definitely go, but it doesn't matter if they're rude because for them, they are not rude.
right,
You
right.
know, that's just how they are. And they would be very surprised that you take it badly. It's
Interesting.
just, it's a different mentality.
Sure.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, aside from, we talked about some of the literary figures in Paris. So aside from Stein, aside from Ford Madox Ford, aside from Hemingway, are there any other famous writers or figures that, or just famous people that Porter encountered during her time in Paris? Did they have any kind of influence on her?
I'm not sure. I think Ford Madox Ford had the most influence on her
Okay.
because he was older and he was well established when she met him. She had already met him in Greenwich Village in the 20s. And so they renewed their friendship when they were in Paris. And they remained friends more or less until his death in 1939. But he was the one who, he was in a position where he was the mentor,
Yes.
and where she was looking up to him. But Catherine Ann Porter did not like to look up to people for too long, I think. so
Hmm.
it did not last too long. But he did recommend her for translating a French songbook.
Mm,
And he did help her out in the beginning a lot. And they remained friends, but it was an up and down relationship a lot.
sure.
Mhm.
And he was the one that made the famous quote. I think it was him. 85% of the people in this world are just stuff to fill graves with. And Porter was fond of quoting that.
Mhm.
I think I got that right. Um,
Right. I
but
think they admired each other. They both had very strong characters,
yes.
but
And
they did not always get along.
what about Hart Crane? She encounter him at all in Europe, or was that in Mexico? I'm
I
trying to.
think it was mainly in Mexico. I think she heard about his death when she was in Europe,
I see.
but
I see.
I'm not sure she saw him when she was in Paris. You'd have to ask Darlene Unruh about that. I don't
Yes,
know.
she knows everything
She knows
about
everything.
Porter. There's no doubt about that. Okay, so switching to sort of Porter as a writer, sort of getting away from her as a person, did Paris inspire Porter to write, and was her stay in Paris, would you say, a productive time for her from a literary standpoint?
Let me see, I've written a few notes on this. Yes, I believe it was very productive from a literary standpoint. Uh, she was very concentrated there. Porter seemed to leave places and go to new places so that she could work. And when she was in Paris, she worked. She was concentrated and she finished some of her most creative work. And as usual, she did not write about Paris when she was in Paris.
Hmm.
She wrote about Mexico and about Indian Creek. And she wrote her short story Hacienda there
Okay.
in 1934. She was in Paris when she wrote that. And she wrote Noon Wine,
Hmm.
which was published in Signatures in the spring of 1936 when she was in Paris. And she um, she worked on Cotton Mather, her unfinished
Hmm.
biography of the Puritan minister from New England. And her novel also Promised Land while she was there, although she did not finish them. She worked also on Flowering Judas,
Hmm.
and which was published with other stories added to it. And three of those stories she had written in Paris. She wrote That Tree, The Looking Glass, and Hacienda, which while she was in Paris. So these, of course, are from memory. They were not about Paris. They were about other places where she had been. But her Parisian time was really very productive.
Yeah, I didn't know all that. Sounds like it was very, very productive. Maybe she should have stayed there longer. She would have written, because my criticism of Porter is always that she didn't write enough. Well, it's not really fair to say that she didn't write enough fiction, but she wrote a heck of a lot. She wrote a lot of essays, a ton of letters, and
Mhm.
book reviews. But I just always wish she had written more fiction. It sounds like Paris was producing more on the fiction side, because I wish she'd stayed there.
Right,
But
right. No, I think she was happy there for a certain time and she was productive.
yeah. Um, So going back to Ship of Fools, can you think of any other? I get to keep harping on this, but because Mary Treadwell talks so much about Paris, and I know Porter spent a fairly long time there, are there any other similarities that you can? I had to go back and read this vignette again last night to kind of refresh my memory. There's so many places that Mary Treadwell talks about in Paris that I don't see how Mary Treadwell could have recollected all these things if Porter hadn't been to all these places herself or knew something about them. Um,
Mhm.
so, any other similarities you can think of between Mary Treadwell and Porter as you read that vignette back?
Um, well, I think that, as you say, the places that she mentions are places that Porter frequented. She talks about the Café de Flore on the Boulevard Saint-Germain, and which was a symbol of artistic life at the time Porter was there. Porter also went to the Coupole and a lot of the other cafes in the Montparnasse area. Uh, she Mary Treadwell talks about going to Les Halles to have onion soup, which is just very traditionally Parisian. After you go to the opera, you go and have onion soup in Les Halles, and
Hmm.
you watch the sun come up.
Yes.
So they're very typical Parisian experiences. And what I found very interesting was that Mary Treadwell calls herself a resident tourist.
Yes.
You know, as Porter, I don't think Porter really knew the French. She knew some of expat Americans and she knew a lot of people and she was very social, but I don't think she talked a lot about French friends. And Mary Treadwell is the same. She
Hmm.
was a resident tourist. She went to the tourist areas, the places where, if you say the Bois de Boulogne, you think about Paris instantly.
Sure.
She had a certain view of Paris that was very idealized.
When I read
She,
that vignette back myself last night, I said it made me want to visit Paris. It's just so
Mhm.
so
it is, she did
yeah,
know the right places to go.
yeah.
It's a very, but it's also I'm not sure if it's the real Paris.
Right,
It's the
right.
idealized Paris.
And I was thinking, just as an aside, another parallel, Mary Treadwell's husband beat her out of jealousy. And I know that one of Porter's husbands, at least one, physically abused her. So I thought there was a parallel there.
Right.
Mm.
Mhm.
And but Mrs. Treadwell's sort of outlook, her sort of belief that all the bad things that happen aren't real, and that even reality is she's faced with reality, she thinks it isn't real. I don't think that's Porter. Or
Mm.
maybe it's a well, Porter said she was everywhere and nowhere in the book. She was everybody but nobody. So Mrs. Treadwell must have been a part of her.
Yes, I think she was definitely a part of her.
Yeah.
But Porter was so critical, and she had such a keen sense of observation. I don't think any of the people were entirely Porter,
Mm,
but Porter could see some of Mary Treadwell in herself.
sure.
Sure.
Um, I've published three books of poems, and I always tell people that I think writers should travel, because if I hadn't traveled, I don't think I would have written half of the things I've written in my books. There's just so many sources of inspiration out there that if you can find them, and
Mhm.
you just can't stay in your room. I mean, you have to go back to your room to write, but you can't stay in your room your whole life. You have to go out and then come back and have things to write about. So um, so what if I was trying to remember is I couldn't find any essays. I'm sure there just maybe couldn't find, but I know that Porter at some point talked about traveling for writers and the need for writers to travel. Can you expand a little bit on that or how she felt about that?
I'm not sure which essays you're referring to, but her travels were very important because it was on her travels where she had observations of, and which they were later part of her memories of her travels, and they would become part of her writing. So I think her traveling and her experiences abroad were very, very important. Yes. Um, she said, all the characters and episodes are based on real persons and events, but naturally, as my memory worked upon them and time passed, all assumed different shapes and colors, formed gradually around a central idea, that of self-delusion. So I think traveling was very important to her because she had these observations and she used them later in her writing. I think it's very interesting that she did not use them right away. She she waited,
Yes, yes.
looked back on them.
So
So
this will be like I guess the last question. Let's go back and talk a little bit about Gertrude Stein because I think that's the chief point of interest for a lot of Porter fans of her time in Paris. And maybe can you tell us give us sort of the history of her opinion of Gertrude Stein, her encounter with Gertrude Stein, her nephew's encounter with Gertrude Stein. That's kind of interesting. And then the essay, The Wooden Umbrella, that was written after that. You don't have to give us an hour. I don't want you to go into 2 minutes. Probably take hours to discuss the whole thing. But can you give us kind of a condensed version of the history of all that?
well, I think when she first read Stein's work, I think she thought it was very good, which was in the reviews that she wrote of two books in the 1920s. When she met Stein, she was less impressed. And I read in Joan Givner's biography that She was less impressed because Stein had the habit of talking to men when they
Mm.
arrived and not to the woman. She would let Alice B. Toklas talk to the woman. And I think that did not go over well with Catherine Ann Porter. And Catherine Ann Porter was then very critical of Stein for a while and critical of her writing also, which is, uh, I'm not sure if it's very emotional to criticize somebody's writing you don't like.
Hmm.
See, you're criticizing the person and not really the writing. So I have a little problem with that. And when her nephew Paul went back to see Stein and introduced himself as Catherine Ann Porter's nephew, and Stein said, "Who's that? You know
Hmm.
who that is?" And Catherine Ann Porter was very insulted, but I'm sure Gertrude Stein meant her to be insulted.
Mm.
So there was sort of an antagonism between the two women, I think.
So
But
was
Porter
that,
was a
go
little
ahead.
bit of, yeah, her personality too. She she often liked people in the beginning and did not like them afterwards. Her relationships with people were very up and down. She she could be very critical.
Sure. I know a friend of mine said she was a sharp-tongued woman. I think that maybe that sums her up.
I'm
Um,
sure she was, yes.
So the essay, The Wooden Umbrella, came after, of course, her nephew's meeting with Stein. So that still rankled, and people have accused her of malice in that essay because of her being offended by what her nephew came back and told her, that, what Gertrude Stein had said. Is it
Mhm.
fair to level that accusation against her, that there was something personal in her essay against Stein, or is that not fair, do you think?
I think there was probably something personal, but also, for example, there was something very personal when she criticized Ford Maddox Ford.
Hmm.
In the end, she wrote his in memorandum,
Hmm.
and she was very flattering to him. I think she was somebody who had a lot of ups and downs, but in the end, she was very honest. But she, in the end, if there was an end, I'm not. Did she write Stein's in memorandum?
That I don't know. I'd be surprised if she did, but
Mhm.
I don't know. After reading The Wooden Umbrella, I'd be surprised if there was anything
If
after
there's
that.
anything.
But The Wooden Umbrella is such a wonderful essay in a lot of ways. It's just so
Mhm.
entertaining to read, and now how true it is. Now, is it true that that ended the relationship? That essay ended the relationship between Porter and Josephine Hearst? Is that correct?
I'm not sure if that was what ended their relationship. I read that Porter was distancing herself from Josephine Hearst because of their difference in political views.
Hmm.
She did not like Josephine Hearst's ideas about communism.
Hmm.
So I think there were probably several factors in the fact that they they were no longer close friends.
I know when Herbst died, they did ask Porter for a comment, and she talked about how they had a good relationship, but that she could be. I think she said she was a difficult, clamorous sort of person, but
Mhm.
she was never so with Porter. And she said Porter said that Hearst wrote an open letter to her in some publication after The Wooden Umbrella was published, and
Mhm.
criticizing or something about well, it was right as far as it went, but was it true? And then Hearst also written a letter to Porter saying, you have not captured Hearst, not you have not captured Stein, not by a long shot, something like
Mhm.
that. So that does seem to have been what ended the well, that was the catalyst, or that does seem to be the
Right.
beginning of the
Right.
end of their friendship, the publication of that essay. I think that's right. So the
Mhm.
beginning of the end.
Right.
um,
Right. But it's
yeah,
it's too bad they couldn't just disagree.
yeah, yeah.
You know.
Well, I wanted to thank you so much, and I'd like to ask you one more question. why did you agree to do this interview with me today? I kind of like to ask. I usually ask that of people off camera, but I'll ask you.
Yes.
I'll ask you on camera. So why did you
Why
want
did I
to?
agree? Well, I was a little hesitant about it because I'm not a real specialist of Catherine Ann Porter, but I am very interested in her. And as part of the association, I think it's very important that we encourage new scholars to be interested in her. And I think that that's why I think your YouTube channel can do a lot for the Catherine Ann Porter Society.
Mm,
I think it's very important to have new members, younger members, and more international members who are interested in Porter. So that's why I agreed. I don't really like to speak in public that much.
sure, sure. Well, the Catherine and Board Society has done a lot for me too, I can tell you. And you've helped expand my channel and given me some referrals. And because nobody
Mhm.
knew me from Adam before I started this channel. I'm not a scholar. I've never published anything on Porter, so no one should be talking to me at all. But I'm just glad that
Well,
slowly but
it's
surely,
great.
yeah,
It's
slowly and
great
surely, I
you're
built up
doing
an
this.
audience. Yeah.
No, and I wanted to support your efforts doing this, of course, because it's wonderful.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much, and
Thank you.
thank you for doing this, and thank you for educating us on Porter and her time in Paris and a few other things. And I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Okay, well, I hope to see you in Chicago.
I hope to see you as well.
Okay, nice talking with you.
Take care.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.